I think I didn't do anything wrong, just made a joke like I always do, and now my husband's side of the closet is empty. He didn't yell or threaten, just zipped his suitcase and left. Everyone says I should have known better, but how was I supposed to predict one sarcastic comment would end a 10-year marriage? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Clara Renford. I'm 34, and I used to think humor was what kept our marriage alive. Eli would get quiet, I'd make a joke, and we'd move on. It worked for years. He taught middle school, came home tired, and I filled the silence with sarcasm. It was our rhythm, or at least I thought it was. We'd been married almost a decade, no kids, nice condo, a life that looked fine from the outside. Too fine, too predictable. Sometimes I'd joke that even our arguments had a schedule. Lately, things between us had felt heavy, like every word had to be measured. He'd reach for me at night, and I'd tease instead of touch. I didn't mean to be cruel. It was easier than admitting I didn't know how to reconnect. When I'd say something cutting, he'd just go quiet, and I'd roll my eyes, thinking he was being dramatic. That was how we worked. I'd push, he'd retreat, and by morning, everything went back to normal. Then came the night that changed everything. We were out with friends, wine flowing, everyone laughing about relationships. Someone asked how we kept things interesting after so many years, and I said without thinking, if I ever get too bored, I'll just find intimacy somewhere else. Everyone laughed, except Eli. He just stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. I tried to play it off, told him to lighten up, that it was a joke. He didn't say a word. Later that night, when we got home, he quietly packed a bag. I stood there, still holding my shoes, waiting for him to yell or argue or do something. But he didn't. He just said, "I can't keep being your punchline," and walked out. The night started like every other double date we'd had with our friends. The restaurant was loud, the lighting soft, the kind of place where everyone talks a little too much because the wine keeps coming. I'd been in a good mood for the first time in weeks. Eli sat across from me, polite as always, laughing when it was appropriate, nodding when people talked. He had that calm, teacher energy that everyone loved. Patient, predictable, steady. It used to make me feel safe. Lately, it just made me restless. When the conversation turned to marriage, our friend Lauren joked about her husband snoring and how it killed the romance. People laughed and I jumped in. I said something about how routine kills passion, how sometimes you start feeling like roommates who share bills and grocery lists. Eli gave me a look, the kind that means stop now. But I ignored it. The table was laughing and I liked the sound of it. Then Mark, the other husband, said, "You two have been married forever and still seem solid. What's your secret?" Without thinking, I said, "Oh, you know, if I ever get too bored, I'll just find intimacy somewhere else." I smiled, expecting laughter, and for a second I got it. Lauren covered her mouth. Mark nearly choked on his drink. Everyone giggled awkwardly. But Eli didn't laugh. He just stared at me, eyes still, like I'd said something obscene instead of funny. I tried to save it, saying, "I'm kidding, relax, people." But the air had already shifted. Dinner ended weirdly quiet. On the way home, I turned up the radio, tried to joke about how serious everyone had gotten. He didn't answer. I told him he needed to learn how to take a joke. That's when he said, calm and clear, "You meant it." I laughed, but it came out sharp. "Please, Eli, you're being ridiculous." He didn't argue. He just kept driving, hands steady on the wheel, like he was focusing on not exploding. When we pulled into the driveway, I started to unbuckle, still waiting for him to say something, a lecture, an accusation, anything. Instead, he said, "I can't do this anymore." His voice was quiet, almost too calm. I thought he was bluffing. I said, "You're really mad over a joke." He got out of the car without replying. Inside, He went straight to the bedroom. I followed, still half laughing because I thought this was one of his moods. But then I heard the sound of the zipper on his suitcase. I froze. "You're not serious," I said. He didn't even look at me. He started pulling shirts from the closet, folding them neatly. I said his name again, louder this time. "Eli, stop, you're being dramatic." He kept packing. I moved closer, trying to grab the suitcase, but he stepped back and said, "You don't even hear yourself anymore." That made me angry. "I hear myself fine," I snapped. "What I don't hear is a sense of humor. God forbid I say something that isn't perfectly soft and safe." He zipped the bag shut and finally looked at me. "You humiliate me, and then you call it humor," he said. "I've spent years being the joke in your stories. I'm done." I wanted to scream at him, tell him he was overreacting, that everyone teases their spouse. But something about the way he looked at me, not angry, just tired, made the words stick in my throat. He grabbed his keys and walked toward the door. I followed, demanding to know where he was going. "Somewhere you're not laughing," he said, and then the door closed behind him. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the empty space where his shoes had been. The whole apartment felt too quiet. I kept expecting to hear his car start, but it didn't. Maybe he just went to cool off, I told myself. He'd be back in a few hours, ready to talk. I poured a glass of wine, turned on the TV, anything to fill the silence. But as the night dragged on and the clock ticked past midnight, the silence started to feel heavy. I checked my phone. No messages. His location was turned off. I texted, "Are you serious right now?" Nothing. Then, "Fine. If you need space, take it." Still nothing. Around 2 a.m, I finally went to the bedroom. His side of the bed was cold, the closet half empty. I lay there in the dark, replaying what I'd said at dinner, trying to convince myself it wasn't that bad. It was just a joke. That's what I kept thinking. Just a joke. But even as I said it to myself, it sounded less like truth and more like an excuse I'd been using for years. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No sound of the coffee machine, no shoes by the door, no faint humming from the bathroom. Just stillness. I waited a few minutes before checking my phone again, half expecting a message from Eli saying he'd cooled off. Nothing. I called once, then again, straight to voicemail. I told myself he was punishing me, trying to make a point. He'd done it before. Not like this, but enough to know he liked his dramatic silences. I made breakfast anyway, 2 plates out of habit, then stared at the untouched eggs until they went cold. Around noon, my mum called. She'd seen my story from the night before, the restaurant photo, the laughing faces. I told her about the joke, how Eli had overreacted, how he'd actually packed a bag and left. She sighed and said, "Well, men don't like being embarrassed, Clara, especially not about that." I told her it wasn't about that. It was about him taking everything too seriously. She said, "Maybe you should apologize." I rolled my eyes. "For having a sense of humor," I said. "He's being ridiculous." She didn't argue, but I could tell she thought I'd gone too far. Then my friend Nadia came over. She's the kind of friend who brings gossip and validation instead of comfort. When I told her what happened, she laughed and said, "If he can't handle a joke, that's on him. You didn't say anything that bad." That made me feel better for about 5 minutes. We opened wine, scrolled through my old posts, and I started rewriting the story in my head. How I was just trying to be funny, how everyone else laughed, how maybe Eli had been looking for a reason to leave. By the time Nadia left, I'd convinced myself I was the one who'd been wronged. That night, I posted something on my business page. Some people can't take a joke, and that's okay. Not everyone gets humor. I didn't mention Eli's name, but people who knew us understood. A few clients commented laughing emojis. It felt good, like I was reclaiming control of the narrative, until I got a message from Ruth, his mother. It was short. "You should take that down. You've said enough." I didn't reply. Instead, I sent it to Nadia, who wrote back, "Ignore her. She's just protecting her little boy." But the next morning, I got a call from Eli's lawyer. Or maybe just his friend acting as one. I couldn't tell. The voice was formal, calm, saying Eli was requesting space and beginning a legal separation process. The words didn't even make sense at first. Separation? I hadn't cheated, hadn't hit him, hadn't done anything real. I laughed, asked if this was a joke too. The voice didn't laugh back. "You'll be contacted again," was all they said. I texted Eli right after. "Are you serious about this lawyer thing? Can we just talk?" He didn't answer. I sent another message, longer this time, explaining how he was making something small into something huge, how it was humiliating me for no reason, still nothing. By evening, I posted again. Funny how silence can make you look guiltier than words ever could. It got shared 3 times. By the 3rd day, I was furious. How dare he ghost me, act like the victim when I was the one sitting here alone. I called his school. The secretary said he'd taken personal leave. I drove past his parents' house once, just to see if his car was there. It was. I sat in my car across the street, half tempted to march up and demand he talk to me. But I didn't. Instead, I messaged my mom again. "He's hiding with his parents," I said. "Can you believe this?" She said quietly, "Clara, maybe you should stop making this public. You're not helping yourself." I spent that night scrolling through old photos of us. Vacations, birthdays, stupid selfies. I kept thinking about how many times I'd made jokes like that before. Little digs, playful comments, teasing about his quietness, his body, his routines. I used to say he was lucky to have someone who kept things interesting. He'd always smile and say, "As long as it's not at my expense." I thought he was joking. Maybe he wasn't. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of that night at the restaurant. Only this time, when I made the joke, nobody laughed. Everyone just stared. And Eli got up, walked away, and didn't look back. When I woke up, the apartment still smelled like his cologne, faint but everywhere. For the first time, I started to wonder if this wasn't just about one joke. If maybe I'd been building to this for years without realizing it. By the end of the week, the silence had started to feel like a wall I couldn't climb. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened, but it was never him. I told myself he'd come around once he'd cooled off, that he just wanted to teach me a lesson. But when a courier showed up at my office with an envelope marked "Notice of Intent to Separate," my stomach dropped. Inside were neatly typed papers with his signature at the bottom. I read them 3 times before the words started making sense. It wasn't a threat. It was real. I sat at my desk staring at the document, my heart racing. My assistant asked if I was okay, and I said, "Oh, just husband drama." Forcing a laugh I didn't feel. I told her he'd overreacted to something stupid, that men always want to make everything serious. She nodded politely, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Nobody seemed to anymore. That afternoon, Mason came by, a new client who'd been flirting with me since our first meeting. Tall, charming, the kind of man who looked like he'd never had to work hard for attention. He smiled when he saw me sitting there with the papers, said, "Rough day?" I told him my husband had left over a joke. He whistled softly. Some guys just can't handle a woman with personality. I laughed because it felt good to hear someone take my side. He leaned against my desk, close enough for me to smell his cologne. "If he can't laugh with you, he doesn't deserve you," he said. That sentence replayed in my head for the rest of the day. I knew what I was doing when I texted him later. "Drinks tonight? I could use a distraction," he replied instantly. "You've got it." It wasn't a date, I told myself, just 2 adults talking. But when he reached across the table that night and brushed his fingers against mine, I didn't pull away. It felt like proof that I wasn't unlovable, that Eli was the problem, not me. The next morning, guilt hit me in waves, but I pushed it down. I told Nadia about the night, leaving out the parts that sounded bad. She said, "Good for you. Maybe this'll remind him you're not sitting around waiting." I wanted to believe that too. that I still had control. But when I walked into the office, I noticed people whispering again. Someone had seen Mason and me at the bar and posted a picture. The caption was harmless enough. "Looks like Clara's moving on fast." But I knew how it would look if Eli saw it. By evening, another letter arrived. This one was from Eli's lawyer. A calm, professional tone, listing grounds of emotional cruelty and requesting a formal statement regarding publicly inappropriate conduct. My throat went dry. He was documenting everything. I called his number right away, but it went straight to voicemail again. I left a long message saying he was being ridiculous, that if he wanted attention, he was getting it, that he'd turned something private into theater. I hated how desperate I sounded. That night, I met Mason again. I told him about the new letter, how Eli was trying to make me look like a villain. He said, "Maybe you should just admit you're not happy. It's not a crime to outgrow someone." His words made sense, but they also felt like gasoline on an open flame. I said, "I didn't outgrow him. He just stopped being interesting." Mason smiled and said, "Then stop pretending you owe him anything." It was what I wanted to hear. When I got home, I poured wine and reread the separation papers. There were no angry words, no blame, just facts. Marriage dissolved, property to be divided, emotional damages not pursued. That last line made my chest ache. He wasn't even asking for compensation. He just wanted out. I opened my phone and typed a new post. "Some men can't handle being married to a woman with opinions. Guess silence is their safe space." I hit post before I could think about it. Within minutes, people liked it, commented, sent laughing emojis. But as I scrolled through the replies, I noticed a few quiet ones that made my stomach turn. "Girl, maybe stop talking about him online." And another, "Not everything's a punchline." I stared at those words for a long time, the laughter from my followers already fading into white noise. For the first time, I wondered if Eli's silence wasn't weakness at all. Maybe it was the only power he had left. And maybe that's why it terrified me so much. The following week felt like walking through fog. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from friends asking what was going on. DMs from people I barely knew. Clients cancelling consultations. Word had spread fast. Someone had shared a screenshot of my latest post, the one about men and silence, on a local community page. The caption underneath said, "Imagine humiliating your husband online and then playing the victim." Hundreds of comments followed, some mocking, some furious. Every notification felt like a slap. I tried to act unfazed, telling Nadia it was all just gossip. "They don't know the full story," I said, even though I hadn't really told anyone the full story myself. She told me to ignore it, to post something new and drown out the noise. "Control the narrative," she said, sipping her coffee like it was that easy. So I did. I uploaded a video from my studio, talking about resilience and not letting fragile people control your spirit. I smiled through the whole thing, even joked that people should learn to laugh at life more. For a few hours, it worked. The views climbed, the comments were supportive. Then someone tagged Eli's school. By the next morning, my inbox was flooded with angry messages. Some said I was cruel. Others accused me of emotional abuse. A few were from parents who said they'd pulled their kids from Eli's classes because of the drama. I couldn't breathe reading them. I wanted to scream, "I'm not a monster. It was just a joke." But anything I said now would look like another performance. My mum called again that afternoon. Her voice was calm but sharp. "You need to stop," she said. "You've made your point and it's only hurting you now." I snapped back that I wasn't going to be bullied into silence. "It's not bullying, Clara," she said. "It's consequences." I hung up before she could say more. I told myself she was just taking his side, like everyone else seemed to. I went to see Mason that evening. I didn't tell him about the comments, just said I needed company. He let me in, poured a drink, and sat close enough that our shoulders touched. I told him I felt misunderstood, that everyone had turned on me. He said, "That's what happens when you tell the truth. People hate it." His confidence soothed me. For a moment, I believed him. I believed I was the brave one, not the cruel one. But when I mentioned the possibility of things becoming more serious between us, his face shifted. He said, "You don't need another relationship right now, Clara. You need to figure out your mess." The way he said it, clean, detached, made me realize he'd already decided to distance himself. I asked if he was worried about how it would look, being seen with me. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I just don't want to be part of this anymore." It hit like a door slamming in my chest. I tried to joke, said, "You're scared I'll make a joke about you next." He didn't laugh. He just said, "Exactly." I left his apartment before I started crying. The drive home was quiet, no music, no calls. I kept replaying his words, trying to turn them into something less cruel. By the time I parked, my phone had another message. This one from an unknown number. It was short: "Cease and desist from all defamatory statements. Continued public commentary may result in litigation for damages." At the bottom was Eli's lawyer's signature. I laughed out loud, though it came out shaky. Suing me? For what? For saying words? I paced the kitchen, rereading the message over and over. It didn't feel real. I poured myself another drink and called Nadia. She told me to stay calm, said he was bluffing. "He's trying to scare you into shutting up." I wanted to believe that, but deep down I knew Eli wasn't bluffing. He didn't yell, didn't bluff, didn't threaten. When he acted, it meant he'd already made up his mind. The next day, I went to my studio early, trying to focus on work. My assistant avoided eye contact. She finally said, "Clara, maybe take a break from social media. Clients are asking questions." Her tone was cautious, almost apologetic. I wanted to be angry, but I couldn't. She was right. My name had become toxic. By afternoon, I gave in and checked Eli's social media, though I knew he hadn't posted in months. His account was gone. No trace. He'd erased himself from everything we'd shared. The photos, the comments, the pieces of our life I thought would last. It was like he'd never existed. That somehow hurt more than any lawsuit. When I got home that night, I sat on the floor, surrounded by paperwork and empty glasses. I thought about the version of me I'd tried to sell, the witty, fearless woman who couldn't be hurt. But all I felt was hollow. The silence wasn't empowering anymore. It was suffocating. I opened my laptop and started typing a long post, half apology, half defense. Something about how humor is subjective and how people shouldn't weaponize their pain against others. But halfway through, I stopped. No words could fix what I'd done. I deleted the draft and shut the screen. A few minutes later, I heard a knock on the door. My heart jumped, stupidly hoping it was Eli. It wasn't. It was another courier, this time with a thicker envelope. Official court documents. I signed without reading, my hands shaking. When the door closed, I tore it open and saw my name printed beside his again, but not like before. This time, it read, "Renford vs. Renford, petition for divorce on grounds of emotional harm and public defamation." I sank onto the couch, the papers slipping from my hands. There it was, the end of the joke. The punchline I never saw coming. The mediation took place on a Wednesday morning in a downtown office that smelled like old carpet and cold coffee. I sat across from Eli for the first time in almost a month. He looked different, calmer, sharper, like a man who'd already lived through the worst and was just here for the paperwork. I'd imagined this moment over and over, thought he'd look regretful, maybe even guilty for overreacting. But he didn't. He just nodded at me once, polite and distant, like we were strangers meeting for a business appointment. The mediator, a woman in her 50s with a steady voice, began by explaining that this was a chance to resolve things amicably. I almost laughed. There was nothing amicable left. Eli's lawyer slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside were printed copies of my posts, screenshots, even some old messages between me and Nadia, where I'd joked about needing to find excitement somewhere else. My face burned. I glanced at Eli, expecting a hint of satisfaction, but his expression didn't change. "This isn't about money," his lawyer said. "Mr. Renford is requesting a public apology, the removal of all social media content referencing him, and an agreement to refrain from further commentary." I forced a laugh. "So he wants to control what I say now. I can't even make a joke without legal supervision." The mediator cleared her throat gently. "This is not about control, Mrs. Renford. It's about boundaries." That word, boundaries, set something off in me. I said, "I was married to him for 10 years. I think I've earned the right to talk about my own life." Eli finally looked at me then. His eyes were steady, unreadable. "You can talk about your life," he said quietly. "Just stop using mine as your punchline." The room went still. I opened my mouth, ready to argue, but the words died in my throat. For a moment I saw it from his side. The endless little comments, the way I'd made him small just to feel big, the way laughter had become my shield. But instead of admitting it, I said, "You're just angry because people finally saw who you really are." Eli didn't take the bait. He folded his hands on the table. "Maybe," he said, "but at least I didn't turn you into a joke to prove I mattered." The mediator stepped in, trying to steer us back to civility. "Mrs. Renford," she said gently, "you can respond later. For now, please review the proposed terms." I scanned the document again. 3 pages, simple, emotionless. It didn't even mention the word love, just apologies, removals, restrictions, signatures. At the bottom, in neat type, were the words, "irreconcilable differences arising from emotional cruelty." I felt my throat tighten. "Emotional cruelty? You make it sound like I tortured you." He didn't flinch. "Words can be torture," he said. I wanted to shout, to cry, to make him see that it wasn't that bad. That I'd been joking, that everyone laughed, that I didn't mean to break him. But nothing I said would undo the years of sarcasm, the little public digs, the way I'd dismissed his feelings until he stopped showing any. The mediator gave us a short break. I stepped into the hallway, gripping my phone like it could anchor me. Nadia had texted earlier, "You've got this. Don't let him guilt trip you." I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. For the first time, her words felt hollow. When I returned to the room, Eli and his lawyer were quietly discussing something. The mediator smiled as I sat down. "We're close to resolution," she said. "It's just a matter of signing." I picked up the pen, but my hand wouldn't move. "If I sign this," I said, "you'll really just walk away?" "That's it?" Eli nodded. "That's it? After everything we built?" He hesitated just a moment. "You tore it down one joke at a time," he said. "I'm just clearing what's left." That sentence hit harder than anything else. I wanted to throw the pen at him, to scream that he was being cruel now, that he was rewriting history. But deep down, I knew he was right. I signed anyway, my name shaky and uneven. When it was over, he thanked the mediator, shook her hand, and left without looking back. I sat there staring at the empty chair across from me. The mediator said softly, "I've seen hundreds of cases like this, Mrs. Renford. It always ends the same way. Someone mistakes sarcasm for strength until the other person stops listening." I didn't reply. That evening, my mum came over. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just hugged me and asked if I wanted dinner. I said no. After she left, I poured myself a drink and opened my laptop. The temptation to post was unbearable, to tell my side, to remind people I wasn't the villain. I even typed it out. Sometimes men can't handle honesty, so they call it cruelty. My finger hovered over the post button, but something stopped me. Maybe exhaustion, maybe the memory of Eli's face when he said, "Words can be torture." I deleted the draft and shut the computer. When I went to bed that night, the condo felt foreign, like I was living inside an echo. I stared at the ceiling and thought about every time I'd called him boring, fragile, humorless. I'd meant them as jokes, but maybe they were warnings I ignored. Maybe he'd been trying to tell me, in his quiet way, that I was killing us slowly. Sometime after midnight, my phone buzzed. It was an email notification. Finalized mediation agreement. Renford v. Renford. I clicked it open. My name and his, side by side one last time. And beneath it, a single line typed by his lawyer. All terms accepted, matter closed. For the first time, I didn't cry or rage. I just sat there in the dark, realizing that for once, Eli had written the ending. And he didn't need a single punchline to do it. It's strange how quiet a home becomes when it stops belonging to anyone. The week after mediation, I walked through the condo like a guest, touching things that used to mean something. The framed wedding photo was gone from the wall. Eli must have taken it. His books were missing. The mug he always used gone from the sink. What was left looked clean, staged, like a space ready to be rented to someone new. I tried to convince myself that this was temporary, that he'd come back once he realized how empty life felt without me. But deep down, I knew it was over. Every morning, I checked my phone expecting a message. There was none. No calls, no angry texts, not even a question about the apartment. Just silence. I filled the hours with noise. The TV, music, phone calls I didn't care about. Nadia still messaged sometimes, but her words started to sound like background static. "You should post again," she said. "Remind people who you are." I didn't reply. For once, I didn't want an audience. 2 days later, the final divorce papers arrived by courier. No envelope, just a brown folder with my name typed in bold across the front. Inside was a single note from Eli's lawyer. Filed and complete. No further action required. That was it. 10 years of marriage, reduced to 5 words. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers until the light outside turned orange. I thought about calling my mum, but I knew what she'd say, that it was time to learn from this, to move forward. She'd mean well, but the words would sting. So I poured a drink instead, opened my laptop, and scrolled through my old posts. I read each caption, every clever comment that once made me feel powerful. They didn't sound like me anymore. They sounded like a stranger trying too hard to be funny while falling apart. I thought about deleting everything, wiping the past clean. But then I remembered what Eli said in mediation. You can talk about your life. Just stop using mine as your punchline. I realized that deleting those posts wouldn't erase what I'd done. It would just make me look like I wanted to forget. Maybe I didn't deserve to forget. That night, I drafted a final post. Not a joke, not a defense, just a confession. Sometimes humor isn't strength. It's a shield you use until there's nothing left to protect. I lost someone who tried to love me through every punchline, and I didn't notice when he stopped laughing. I stared at it for a long time before hitting publish. No emojis, no hashtags, just words. The comments came fast. Some people were kind. It takes courage to admit that. Others were cruel. Too late now. I didn't reply to any of them. For the first time, I didn't need to explain myself. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my head. The next morning, I woke up early and walked to the small cafe down the street. It was the same place where Eli and I used to meet on weekends, back when things were still light. The barista recognized me and asked, "Is it just you today?" I smiled and said yes. Sitting there alone, I realized I'd spent years pretending independence was power, when really, it had just been loneliness dressed up as confidence. When I got home, a small envelope waited by the door. No return address. Inside was a note written in Eli's handwriting. "I saw your post. Thank you for saying it." No signature, no follow-up, just that. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. An ending, that didn't need to hurt to be real. I folded the note and placed it in the drawer where I used to keep his letters. That evening, I stood on the balcony and looked out over the city. The sky was turning the same dull blue it had been the night he left. I tried to remember the exact sound of the suitcase zipper, the click of the front door closing. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet I could still feel the weight of that silence. Back then, I'd mistaken it for weakness. Now, I understood it was strength, the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. My phone buzzed with another message from Nadia, asking if I wanted to go out that night. I typed back, "Not tonight." Then I turned it off. I didn't need to perform anymore. Before bed, I cleaned out the rest of the closet. One drawer still smelled faintly like his cologne. I closed it carefully and whispered, "Goodbye," though I wasn't sure if I meant it for him or for the version of myself that couldn't stop turning love into a joke. As I lay in the dark, I thought about the last thing Eli ever said to me. "You tore it down one joke at a time." Back then, I'd rolled my eyes, called him dramatic, but now I could see the truth in it. Every sarcastic comment, every laugh at his expense, had chipped away at something fragile until there was nothing left to save. The silence that followed wasn't punishment, it was consequence. The sound of a man who finally chose peace over being someone's punchline. And lying there in that quiet room, I realized peace was the one thing I'd never known how to give. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.